From the studios of the Department of Communication in Phillipsburg, welcome to Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Sylvia Jacobs.
Good afternoon, St. Martin. I'm Cedar Peterson of the Department of Communication under the Ministry of General Affairs. And of course, we welcome you to this edition of Prime Minister Talks. I'm joined by the Prime Minister of St. Martin, the Honorable Sylvia Jacobs. Prime Minister, it's great to have you in edition of the program.
Good day to you as well, Cedric. It's always a pleasure for me to be here. And of course, welcome to all those tuned in to the sound of my voice. I know I've missed a week or two of Prime Minister Talks, but we will do our best to catch up and ensure that we keep you well informed.
For good reason, because I'm sure you've been quite busy as the ongoing negotiations with the Kingdom of the Netherlands continues. We're going to jump right into the questions this week. Question one, Prime Minister, what are the cost-cutting measures that the government of St. Martin has had to implement in order to comply with the conditions for the second tranche of the COVID-19 liquidity support?
Well, thank you for that question. It has been the question that has been on the minds of many, and we have had discussions within the organization. And as such, I feel it is then okay for us to have that discussion on the broader scope. As government of St. Martin, we have cut into what we spend on phone, on gas, and are doing the necessary, reevaluating contracts and moving certain departments to be able to save on rent as well. So the phone policy, the gas use policy, and becoming more efficient and effective in our spending as it pertains to rental of buildings for government's use. We've also generated some funding, which would be in the collecting of outstanding fees related to permits, licensing, etc. And of course, ensuring that we are effectively and efficiently using the limited resources, human as well as capital, that we have moving forward. Some of the other conditions relate to the 25% reduction on the total package of the employment conditions of the members of parliament and the ministers, and that can be broken down how we did that to get to the 25%. The third condition was that we would then reduce also the total package of the employment conditions of all employees in the semi-public and public sector, including the companies, publicly funded companies, and other institutions that are financed for at least 50% from the budget. So this includes subsidized entities like school boards and the rest by 12.5% as of July 1st, 2020. Also for the members of parliament that I mentioned, is also as of July 1st, 2020. And we are continuously, of course, looking for more areas within the organization whereby we can be more efficient and effective with the use of our funds. And the last condition was the 130% norm, which translates into, or maximizing that, translating into no one else within the semi-public or public sector, including the public companies, as mentioned before, publicly funded companies and other institutions that are financed or subsidized for at least 50% from government's budget, including interim and consultants and full-time consultants. None should earn more than 130% of the employment conditions of the total employment package of the Prime Minister. So in that also, we have, let's say, met that condition as well. So those were the four main conditions. And what I mentioned as the first one was literally that things that would not be covered within what the Netherlands would be subsidized. So that's why we still had to make some cuts on our operational side as well as personnel side. So I'm hoping that clarifies the general compliance that we had to reach for the conditions of the second tranche of liquidity support, which we incidentally have already received.
Prime Minister, I can't help but to wonder what this exercise is currently, what it means to you as Prime Minister of this country going through this. Yes, there's meeting the compliance of what the Dutch are requesting. But what does it mean for you as the Prime Minister of this country going through this exercise? What is it allowing you to see about this organization that is ours?
Well, what I can say is that it opens the eyes of not only us, me, the Prime Minister, the Council of Ministers, in the sense of areas that we could have, let's say, secured savings much earlier. It is unfortunate that it has to be pointed out to you. I must say, though, prior to the discussions with the Dutch, that we as government St. Martin had already reduced, for instance, by 10%. Salaries of Parliament and government, I think by 15. Maybe it was just 10, sorry. But in any case, we'd already started that process and started the discussions with the unions to be able to have a package ready for the discussions as we knew that it was coming. Curacao had already, and Aruba specifically, had already submitted theirs, and we really did not want to be pulled on one line with any other country that has a completely different situation as ours. So we, knowing the COVID situation would negatively impact our situation, as it had already been negatively impacted by the passage and the disastrous effects of the two hurricanes in 2017, the super hurricanes, let me add. We know already what it is to have to tighten our belts. We have been tightening our belts throughout these 10 years in order to be complicit or compliant with the request of the CFT and being financially, let's say, responsible and accountable. So over the past 10 years, we have been doing that. Ministries are used to it and not being able to execute to the maximum capacity as a result. So it actually hurt me as Prime Minister to have to even go further into the discussions. Over the years, some of the personnel costs were inflated, so we were able to see some cuts there that wouldn't directly affect those working. But in the end, the Dutch government wanted to see an actual reduction within the current and actual costs. And that is where, let's say, the pain started and the discussion started. And I must say that together with our finance minister and his support staff, we have been doing everything within our power to avoid touching the salaries of our civil servants. So really looking at secondary and tertiary benefits for those cuts. But I must say it has been a battle with the CFT as they did not accept many of our proposals for secondary and tertiary benefits. And so while we could cut those points and make necessary cuts in our expenditures, they would not count towards the 12.5% or the 25%, as was constantly being requested by the CFT. Some of our challenges also stemmed from having a differing sense of a differing point of departure from the CFT, as well as the Ministry of BZK and our Ministry of Finance, or let's say our government interpretation of what these conditions would be. And this is something that I think played a huge role, but the time that it has taken for us to come to some type of a consensus or agreement on what these conditions could be really pushed us to our limits in terms of not touching the salaries, the direct salaries that would influence the spending power of the civil servants. And in our even last fights, discussions and dialogue with the CFT last week, Friday, we reiterated over and over that with so many in the private sector out of work or with a diminished salary or relying on salary support from government or unemployment from government, our small society, the guarantee of the salary of our civil servants actually helped to carry some family members and our economy, which even in the throne raider of the king, it was stated that the Dutch government, in order to sustain its economy, was supplementing salaries to be able to keep the economy going. We've also been able to confirm for ourselves the agenda of the Netherlands, where we are constantly battling to be treated with equality within this kingdom we call the Netherlands, Kingdom of the Netherlands. I don't know if you want me to elaborate on that.
No, actually, we're going to go into our first break and then get into the next topic that I want to address with you in regard to the fact that the our sister islands have acknowledged and confirmed that they want to get into the Caribbean Reform Entity. And we want to get a clarity on our position in regard to that topic. So, St. Martin, you're viewing and listening. Prime Minister Talks, a brand new edition this week. Thanks so much for tuning in. Stay with
Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Sylvia Jacobs.
Coronavirus is most likely to spread from person to person when we come into close contact with one another. We can all help stop the spread by keeping our distance. This means do not shake hands or exchange physical greetings, and wherever possible, stay at least 1.5 to 2 meters away from others. It's also really important to practice good hygiene, especially after being in public places. Together we can help stop the spread and stay healthy. Visit stmartingov.org/coronavirus or call 914 to learn more. This public service announcement is brought to you by the Government of St. Martin. The following public service announcement brings to you a few of the many unsung heroes in the medical profession who are working tirelessly to put our needs ahead of theirs and in the midst of this battle to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Listen closely to their message so that we all can remain safe.
Good day, General Public of St. Martin. I'm Dr. Felix Holliday, General Surgeon and Medical Director of the St. Martin Medical Center. I'm staying at work for you, so please stay home for me. Stay safe.
My name is Christina Jacobs-Burkle. I'm the Junior Patient Care Manager. COVID-19 affects everyone, so please, everyone, let's protect everyone and stay home.
Hi, I'm Meandra Hazel, ICU nurse. I'm a frontline nurse and I'm asking you to be a frontline citizen. Please stay home, save a life. Help me to help you.
This public service announcement is brought to you by the St. Martin Medical Center and the Government of St. Martin.
Gen yon maladi nan le monde entier ki rele coronavirus ou bien COVID-19. Li bay problem respiratoire. Sa pou n'kembe nan tèt nou se ki jan pou n'proteje tèt ou ak fami ou. Kontrole santé ou pendant 14 jours si nou te voyaje kite peyi ya. Sou vin développer la fièvre ou ap tousse ou bien gen difficulté respire, rete la kayou pas sorti. Rele docteur sou gen numéro téléphone docteur. Pratike façon hygiénique pour tousse ak pou lave men. Évitez entrer en contact avec moun kap tousse ou bien kap estene. Sou gen nécessité assistance médicale, rele avant. Expliquez docteur ou bien département urgence lan ki jan senti ou. Expliquez yo si ou te voyager. Expliquez yo si ou pense ou te entrer en contact ak yon moun ki peut-être te exposé à virus lan. Pour plus information, rele 914. Annonce publique sa sorti dans santé, contrôle ak prévention maladie et gouvernement Saint-Martin.
Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Sylvia Jacobs.
In this week's conversation, we're talking to the PM about the ongoing communication with the Dutch in regard to liquidity support. Question number 2, Prime Minister, seeing that last week Curacao and most recently Aruba's also, they have accepted the Caribbean Reform Entity. Is St. Martin prepared to say yes to this entity? And if so, what would that mean for St. Martin? And are there differences between the COHO and the Caribbean Reform Entity?
Thank you for that question. I think that, has been on the minds of many as well. Curacao did agree several weeks ago, actually, but still had to do some other, let's say, homework for the compliance with the second tranche, actually, to sign on to the agreements, which did happen this week. However, or last week. However, Aruba mentioned in the press, and I can only go by what has been mentioned in the press, in my personal discussions also with the Prime Minister, that it is not a final yet, as they still had to receive the documents back from the Netherlands and to be able to present those to the Parliament of Aruba. So while the Aruban government is ready to say yes, the official yes is not finalized yet, but we can expect that that will happen. Both of these countries were financially in a position that they could no longer say no, hold on, or wait. And I think that is where St. Martin did have a little more, let's call it, liquidity to play with. Initially, we thought by October we would have been out of money, but we are still managing to hold on and meet our main obligations thus far. What I can say is that even as Aruba and Curacao have said yes and almost yes to an entity, There have been some concessions made by the Netherlands. And so we, as government of St. Martin, not having had the opportunity to go through the same negotiation process as they have, would still need that time to assess whether these changes brought about are acceptable to not just our government, but our parliament, as we have had the mandate from parliament in terms of, yes, move on with the negotiations, but the challenge of our government and parliament is in the powers of the entity. And I know some changes have been made and some claims have been made, but I can say based on the first scan of the differences or the comparison between the COHO and the Caribbean Reform entity that had been previously been put forward by the Dutch government on July 10th are minimal at most. And we are doing a deeper research to see exactly where these changes can be realized and have an effect, because there's one thing to say that you've made changes in the explanatory notes, but the law is the law. And so unless some serious changes can be seen within the law itself, it would be difficult to say that we are ready to sign on as is. In any case, as soon as we are able to have the discussions with the Dutch government, we have our package of reforms whereby we've done the comparison between what they presented and where we are and what our vision is for St. Martin for the next 10 years in our NDV. And we are prepared to have those discussions based on our priorities, because in all that is within the purview of the countries within the kingdom, it is that the policy, programming, and legislation is the priority and the purview of that country. So we are prioritizing what we would like to work on while admitting that there is much to be worked on that has not been finalized in these first 10 years, or let's call it 40 years, because this is from, let's call it Antilles days right up until today, that certain things have been in dispute to be done and updated. And we are looking forward to start those discussions, of course, with the changes already booked in mind, but of course, us only having been privy to those over the last few days and probably 1 week.
Prime Minister, interestingly enough, you were asked a question this week by the members of the media during the Council of Ministers press briefing that drew references between the two organizations. Apparently, the Caribbean Reform entity has undergone a name change, Caribbean Body for Reform and Development. Is there a difference between these two organizations?
Okay, well, based on the little we've been able to garner thus far, the Caribbean Reform entity was initially proposed as a ZBO, which is an organ, but now they're also including the developments, the ontwikkelingen, and that's the second O, and the first O is now the orgaan. So it is not completely having all the powers of a ZBO, but it would have an organ with some of the powers of a ZBO, or some of the independence part, but not the full scope. That is what I'm seeing thus far in terms of the name change. But in terms of the differences within the law itself, we have not been able to find huge differences, and I am still awaiting a full overview review of the two to be sure what the actual changes are. And once we have that down packed, then we will be able to decide how we're moving forward, or if still more changes would be required for St. Martin.
Government has been in negotiations now for CFT for about 3 months. How are these negotiations moving along?
The negotiations with the CFT have been tedious, have been very, very long. And I must say that, I must commend our finance ministry for their patience in continuing to push. As I mentioned in the first segment, that our main goal as government was to ensure that we don't touch on the salaries of our civil servants. And I must say that up until our last discussions, that we did everything we could to be able to cut on secondary and tertiary benefits. And in our last discussions and with the last counter proposal of the minister, whereby they were given options, the CFT still opted that certain things we proposed were not possible, and that we would still possibly touch on at least the highest earners in government as it pertains to their connection with the minister's salaries as well. So the majority still would not be touched, but if, in the last resort, only maybe the highest earners, which is a very small percentage of our civil service, would then also see a reduction in their salaries as well.
St. Martin, you're viewing and listening to this edition of Prime Minister Talks. In our last segment, we're going to get into the conversation with the Prime Minister concerning an alternate proposal that was sent to the CFT this past week. More on this is coming up in our last segment of Prime Minister Talks. Stay tuned.
Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Sylvaria Jacobs.
The following public service announcement brings to you a few of the many unsung heroes in the medical profession who are working tirelessly to put our needs ahead of theirs and in the midst of this battle to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Listen closely to their message so that we all can remain safe.
Hello, my fellow St. Martiners. I am Nurse Carty from the Ambulance Department. We are now facing a very crucial time. Please adhere to the instructions given. Follow good hand hygiene, social distancing, and please stay at home.
My name is Angelo Martina. I'm one of the supervisors of the emergency room. Let's fight this. Stay home.
I am Dr. Sameh Nadari. I am internist at St. Martin Medical Center. I am here for you. I am at work for you. So please stay at home for us.
My name is Andrele Ellis, pharmacist of Kale Pharmacy in the St. Martin Medical Center. Please stay home.
This public service announcement is brought to you by the St. Martin Medical Center and the government of St. Martin.
Hay un brote de enfermedad respiratoria en todo el mundo causada por el coronavirus COVID-19. Tenemos algunos consejos de salud que debe tener en cuenta para protegerse y proteger a su familia. Controle su salud durante 14 días después de viajar. Si desarrolla fiebre, tos o tiene dificultad para respirar, quédese en casa y notifique a su médico. Después de toser, proceda a la higiene de las manos y evite el contacto cercano con personas que tosan o estornuden. Si necesita atención médica urgente, asegúrese de llamar con anticipación para informar su estado de salud antes de visitar a su médico o a la sala de emergencias. Notifique de sus síntomas, historial de viaje o si cree que estuvo expuesto a una persona con COVID-19. Para información adicional, llame al 914. Este anuncio es dirigido a usted a través del Centro de Servicios Públicos por el Control y Prevención de Enfermedades y el Gobierno de San Martín.
St. Martin has experienced its fair share of hurricanes over the past 25 years, and we faced them all head-on. We've witnessed horrific seasons with staggering loss of property, but this year might be the most destructive of all. The destructive power of hurricanes coupled with the debilitating coronavirus pandemic. Where do you run? Where can you hide? Now is the time to prepare. Think about how and where you'll evacuate to reduce crowds at shelters and maintain social distancing. Have a plan for keeping your elderly family members safe. We live in a hurricane-prone area, so start gathering essential hurricane supplies now. Things like plywood, batteries, generators. Strengthen your home as much as possible while you have time on your hands. While preparing for the hurricane season, follow the latest health guidelines at stmartingov.org/coronavirus. And remember, it only takes one to make it a bad season, so make sure you're prepared.
This public service announcement is brought to you by the government of St. Martin. Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Sylvaria Jacobs.
St. Martin, thanks for joining us for the final segment of Prime Minister Talks in this edition. Prime Minister, our final question that we would like to have you cover with us in this final segment. Can you share with us the details concerning the alternate proposal sent to the CFT by government this past Tuesday, November 3rd?
Yes, what was sent was, let's say, the final tweaks of what had been not complied with according to the CFT in our meeting of Friday, October 30th. This was after the minister had put forth the direct calculations, etc., for everything that to be able to meet with the 25% reduction for ministers and members of parliament at 12.5 for our employees. What had not been accepted, so we had put forth cuts initially related to uniforms, overtime, and vacation pay. After much deliberation, the uniforms, etc., and some other tertiary, let's say, benefits were not counted as part of the cuts. As compared to Curacao and Aruba, these are not taken up in our legislation, so like how the pension is taken up in our legislation. As you will know that we've already agreed to the raise in pension age, which was one of the previous conditions also, which we have met. However, we were not able to utilize some of those, and so we had to counter with some others, whereby some of the overtime would count, yes, and the vacation pay would count. And in order to not touch on the salaries, we then started to look at vacation days and what was legally permissible in terms of by law. And so we made a proposal, which the CFT was not in agreement with in terms of the percentage, as they had already agreed with Curacao and Aruba to a lower percentage as it relates to vacation days of 1.2%. In as much as we argued that we do not have, like I mentioned earlier, the same benefits that Curacao and Aruba could have cut into along other areas, that we just simply didn't have that room, and that this was then the only other area we had left. The CFT did not agree with that interpretation and wanted it to remain on one line. So in terms of equality and not necessarily equity, we believe that as St. Martin, we should have been able to have them concede on that point. However, they did not. What I must say, though, is that on a technical level, there was a, let's call it, agreement in what the conditions for compliance could be prior to the 30th meeting. So it was actually a bit disheartening, while it was a very fruitful meeting, to still have that one point pertaining to the vacation days, and not only for the members of parliament and ministers, but also for the civil servants not being to be used at the level that had been proposed. So in the letter of November 3rd, which was approved by the Council of Ministers, we therefore proposed to utilize the same, gave two options, either 2% or 1.2%, which they had wanted, with then the balance coming from what we had already collected or removed from the June 2020 vacation pay, to supplement that in order to not touch the salaries still of our civil servants for this year. What we are seeing is that while that continues to be the case, we have not been able to say completely remove the need to touch on salaries, because when we now can't use the vacation days either for ministers and members of parliament, it means going after the salaries, even more of the percentage of the salaries of the ministers, which has a negative effect on the highest earners within government's organization, as it is tied to a particular percentage above that. I believe 5 and 10% as it relates to the different ministers and members of parliament and the prime minister as well. So based on the fact that we had to cut further into our own salaries, the highest earners, which is a very small amount, our Minister of Finance, in terms of numbers, could be like 10 or so persons would be touched by that. And it would literally be those that had a complete package that would surpass then the ministers and the prime ministers, as one of the conditions that there would be no representation allowance for ministers and prime minister, no compensation for transport expenses. So all of these percentages added up. We reduced our remuneration, as well as the additional reduction of 9% that was necessary to meet that 25%, and the vacation allowance, which was also a 6%. In the civil service, no one was allowed to earn more than the ministers, so that is how that would affect their salaries if we continue to cut into ours to meet the conditions. The vacation allowance would be reduced as well, and only 1.2% of the vacation days. So while in some cases for the lowest scales, that would be no days lost, in the scale 6 to 9, and the other days 10 to 13, 14 to 17, it could be on average about 3 days that would be lost for the civil servants. But I think all in all, they would prefer to lose a couple of days instead of actual losing pay. So that was the goal of St. Martin's government. We still, of course, have to have further discussions with our unions. We have informed the SGs, the management teams, and the civil service. But unfortunately, due to our ongoing discussions with our CCSU secretariat, we have not been able to finalize the discussions with the unions as yet, but they have been informed duly that we are having discussions with our employees to give them the information as to where we are.
PM, thank you very much for providing us the details. As we're closing out the program, final words.
Yes, first of all, I would like to say this has been a very difficult and challenging road that we have been walking since the onset of COVID-19. I would like to remind the people of St. Martin that St. Martin remains open to these discussions and negotiations, of course, in as far as our own, let's call it autonomy, is not being trampled on as a sovereign country within the Kingdom of the Netherlands. That has been our stance from the beginning. Our laws have to be upheld. Some of the changes that we're talking about will require changes in law as well. And we have committed to make those changes. We still have to, of course, get consent or agreement, dialogue with our unions, etc. But it is what it is. And the reality is one that is worldwide. Countries around the world are tightening their belts because of a lesser development within their economies, and St. Martin is no exception. We are doing our best to still maintain the salaries that they have in their hands so that they can maintain their buying power and also assist members in their families that have lost jobs. But the reality is to be in solidarity with those who have lost. We also must take a bit of a hit, and we're asking understanding from our civil service, general public, in knowing that we are doing all we can within our power and trying to grow our strength financially moving forward and our resilience to external shocks as we go forward, and we will continue to update the people of St. Martin.
Prime Minister and Minister of General Affairs, the Honorable Saveria Jacobs. PM, thank you very much for being a part of this edition of Prime Minister Talks.
Thank you, CJ.
And to our radio listeners and television viewers and online viewers, thank you for tuning in and being a part of Prime Minister Talks. If you've missed this edition, be sure to catch video on demand at the official Facebook page of the Government of St. Martin. That's facebook.com/SXMGOV. If you haven't subscribed to the official YouTube channel of the Government of St. Martin, we invite you to do so at youtube.com, Government of St. Martin. And for audio replay, be sure to tune into St. Martin Gov Radio 107.9 FM at 12 p.m. every day until an updated edition of the program takes place. On behalf of the Prime Minister's Cabinet and all of us here at the Department of Communication, I'm Cedric Peterson. Thanks for tuning in.